What would George Washington think about how the United States Constitution has been ransacked and pillaged by the major monopoly corporations, by the big pharma, the military industrial complex, and the Federal Reserve? My name is John Stuber, and I'm a George Washington author. Lately, my latest books about George Washington are POTUS1 and On the Banks of the Potomac. Not only have I studied George Washington's life and politics, I have looked at his perspective of the United States Constitution and the founders, the other people around George Washington, during the writing and formation of the Constitution and the formation of the infant nation called the United States Republic, like Madison and Jefferson, Hamilton, Henry Knox, all of them, Benjamin Franklin. I've studied these people extensively, and I wanted to understand their perspective of the United States Constitution in today's culture. And I think that when we look at that, we see why things seem so confusing in today's culture. The Constitution says one thing about free speech, or the Second Amendment, or our Fourth Amendment rights, or more importantly, the Ninth and the 10th Amendment, states' rights. And I think that's where the problem comes in the confusion. And this video is going to be a short book review on supplemental reading besides a George Washington biography, to get the perspective of George Washington and the founders of the United States Republic, and why they did what they did, and how they would be perturbed and concerned with what has been happening to the United States Constitution. First of all, in this short book review, I will tell you about a book about an overview of the Constitution by the Heritage Guide to the Constitution, all the amendments, Bill of Rights, all of that. I very highly suggest you read this, and if a state government or the federal government does something, why are they doing what they're doing on a basic level in the Constitution? That's the book I would read. In terms of a crisis and the chaos involved with different competing ideas of the Constitution should be like this in 10 years, or the Constitution should be like that. There's a book, phenomenal book, called The Crisis of Two Constitutions, about the competing ideas for the Constitution, it being written, and what won and what did not, and in today's culture too. Now, from a George Washington perspective, he was essentially a Federalist, you could say. He wanted a little bit more federal insight to the states. For the most part, he wasn't overarching. He wanted the states to do their own thing and the state governors to take care of business. But he was essentially a Federalist, of the label that we put on him. He probably wouldn't say that. But a book called Crisis and Freedom, the Alien and Sedition Acts, understanding George Washington's perspective about the border of the United States and immigration itself, and things that we face today, and why state governors or the President of the United States may do things that seem perplexing to us, but the history behind that comes from a book like this. Now, George Washington being a Federalist, if you want to understand George Washington's mind during that time period, this is the book for you. Understanding why he did what he did, especially with the Jay Treaty. Now, if there's one book I suggest you buy and read, it's the book here called Notes of the Debates in the Federal Constitution by James Madison. Do you know how when you hear on a TV show in court, or someone goes to a court hearing, there's a stenographer who types out everything that's happened and everything that's been said, right? This is what James Madison did. This is the stenographer notes of the Constitution, why they did what they did, why they put what they put in the Constitution, them disagreeing, them coming to a compromise. A phenomenal book about why the Republic must stand or we shall fall separately. Great book about the Republic and the Constitution. More books to supplement that book are the debate on the Constitution, more notes and perspective and writings about the Constitution, its time period during the Constitutional Convention, and why it was written the way it was written. 2 more books on the Constitution I have here. Of course, you can't go do that without talking about the Federalist Papers from Hamilton, Madison, and John Jay. I highly suggest you pick this book up, more so than the notes on the debates of the Constitutional Convention. Very good book about why they did what they did, their perspective of the founding fathers before the Constitution was written, essentially. And this book here is just a good old-fashioned book, commentary about a legal basis for a moral constitution, essentially another perspective about why the Constitution was written the way it was, very specific in certain places and very vague in certain places. Very important. So I've talked a lot about books here, and I wanted to slow it down and talk about history. And that how history itself, if you look at it, it seems like it resets itself. The powers that be beyond the president, the people that run the world, people would say deep state cabal, what have you, they reset history. History is on 80 to 90 year cycles. And there's a book here called The Fourth Turning that has helped me to understand that. This book here shows that in 80 to 90 year cycles, the history itself has been reset. Our calendars have been reset. Everything we know about life is different than it was 100 years ago, obviously. And what we know about history isn't really history. And I think that if people knew that, it would probably concern them, and why we are on this slave debt financial system that we are on today. And what did George Washington really fight for? Why did he do that and fight and travel across the Delaware River to do what he did? It was for the cause. It was the reason to preserve the posterity of the United States Republic and its future generations. This book here by Joseph Ellis, The Cause, it talks exactly about that. Highly suggest you pick this book up to understand George Washington's perspective about the American Revolutionary War. Now, I said that I read other books about the people surrounding George Washington and their perspective on the Constitution, not only reading about George Washington, but other people around George Washington. I read about Jefferson. Now, Jefferson and Washington butted heads a lot, but it's good to have competing ideas in such a large situation as founding a nation. And I think what got between Washington and Jefferson was Hamilton. You had Washington and Jefferson, and then Hamilton got in between them, and that's how we got this fiat debt slave system today. Jefferson, we had he was against the Federal Reserve system and the debt monetary slave system we have today of financial services to enslave its citizens. He was against that. That's talked about a little bit in this book. A perspective on the Jeffersonians in George Washington's time. This book here, I highly suggest you pick that up. And obviously, you got to look at The American Sphinx, again, by Joseph Ellis. Now, I talk about the enslavement of mankind through a financial system, about George Washington being upset about the Constitution of the United States being ransacked or pillaged by these monopoly corporations, the big pharma, military industrial complex, and the Federal Reserve. And I think we can look at in stages how this happened throughout history to then enslave the United States Republic and its citizens. Many other nations have tried to get out of that. This is a history of the central banking system that we have today, and other people who tried to get out of that system in their country but failed because Big Pharma and the military industrial complex did not want them to do that. Essentially like what happened in Benghazi and in Libya when the Clintons took out Gaddafi. He wanted to get off of the central banking system. Whether Gaddafi was bad or good or whatever, that's the real reason. It was because he wanted to get off the central banking system, and JFK wanted to get off of the central banking system, the debt slave system we have today, but they killed him for it. More perspective on that is land of the free, home of the slave. And this goes and talks in minute, exact detail about the financial debt system we have today and how to understand why we can move through it and how to protect ourselves in that, about the slave debt system we have today. Another great book about the history of the slave debt system and how it came about, its inception and origins in the United States, is The Creature from Jekyll Island. This book here talks about the history of the Federal Reserve and the central banking system within the United States and how it came to be. George Washington would not want the central banking system and the Federal Reserve to be as powerful as it was. He was there at the Constitutional Convention. He fought in the American Revolutionary War, was in charge of it as the first commander-in-chief. And then he came back to essentially run the military during John Adams' time because John Adams asked him to because they had a crisis. More history on the corporation we have today. We're in this slave system and things are being hid from us. We have Beyond a Pale Horse by William Cooper about all the secrecy and classified documents that are being hid from the United States citizens and having a perspective that why we think the United States is the way it is today and what it really is in our culture. More about the corporations of today. We have We the Corporations, fantastic book about the United States corporation that runs everything, the unholy union between the Vatican, between the Bank of England and Washington, D.C. And of course, this book here, The Second Founding, fantastic. Now, that's not to say that slavery in George Washington's time is people can't talk about it, but we don't have a time machine to go back and fix the bad and horrid things. There is human trafficking today. Why did I write my POTUS1 book and my On the Banks of the Potomac book? It was to talk about human trafficking today. The Jeffrey Epstein files, the Walmart missing children bulletin boards, the Pizzagate scandal, the Cobalt mines, the Maui missing children, the John Podesta emails, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff, the P. Diddy trafficking case. So many things about human trafficking and sex trafficking today that all people want to do is still talk about slavery in George Washington's time. Slavery in George Washington's time was very bad, and it should never be celebrated, ever. But we can't fix that. This book here, Black Slave Owners, and then this book here, 1620, A Critical Response to the 1619 Project, helps to understand about the culture of slavery in George Washington's time, and then understanding what is going on today through the human trafficking that's going on all around us. And we seem to, as citizens of the United States, not care about the human trafficking going on today. My name is John Stuber, and I am the author of POTUS1 and On the Banks of the Potomac. As I've said before in this video, I have studied not only George Washington's life and politics, but his perspective about the United States Constitution and why and how it was written, and it's being pillaged and ransacked by all these major entities, and how we can understand why culture is the way it is today. Thank you.